Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. Today I'm super proud to present Paolo Villanelli. He's a Marvel comic artist. He's known for drawing Star Wars Bounty Hunter series, Jedi Fallen Order, Lando Double or Nothing, High Republic, and other Star Wars books. Paolo, I'm super happy to have you today. Please introduce yourself. Tell us, the fans, what you're all about. What is the latest content you've been working on as far as Star Wars is concerned?
Hi, thank you very much, Mike, for having me on the podcast. Yes, as you said, I'm a comic book artist, and I've been mainly working on Star Wars titles in the last few years.
Mhm.
As you listed all the stuff I've done lately, and that includes, of course, my latest job on Star Wars Bounty Hunters is a regular series for Marvel Comics,
Mhm.
and it's been going on so far for about 22 issues. And it will go on for a lot more, I can tell you that. I'm currently working on issue 26 of the series so
That's
far.
awesome. You know, your coming into the Star Wars comic books was a huge relief for me personally because as a fan, all fans are critical of some comics. They, have play favorites and they have other books that they enjoy. But once I saw your work, it just reinvigorated Marvel Comics in general is so well. And I was very happy to have you along. As we're recording this podcast, it is Wednesday. And how's the working day of a comic book artist go by? Can you just give us a brief description? What's your day like?
It actually depends on the kind of work I have to do.
Mhm.
But what I like to do usually is wake up early and get to my studio as soon as possible and start working very early
Mhm.
so I can get stuff done by, well, during the whole day until I get to about 5, 6 p.m. And then take a break, go home, enjoy some spare time with
Mhm.
my family, friends, and so on. Sometimes I get to do some late work, but that's mainly because living in another country, I have to take into consideration time zones. So by the time I'm done with my work day, uh, Marvel Comics on the other side of the ocean has just started, and they're taking feedback from Lucasfilm on the other side of America. So it gets a bit messy. So by
Yeah.
the time I eat like late evening, for me, they get in with maybe a couple of notes on pages, some requests for more art. So I might do some little corrections and stuff in the evening, but I mostly try to enjoy some free time doing things I like
Yeah.
playing video games and things like that.
Oh, video games, awesome. A
Um,
huge gamer myself. I can definitely relate to working overhours. I'm a traditionally trained animator. I never pursued it as a career,
okay,
but I studied
okay.
animation. I have BA in that degree, and so I understanding sometimes you have to put in extra work. But now that we know that you're from overseas, you're an international artist. Tell us, what is the comic book scene like in Italy? How would you compare your domestic comic books and comic artists versus Western comics, obviously the giants like DC and Marvel?
Italy has a really strong tradition in comic books. If Traditionally, if we think at the big comic book markets in the world,
Hmm.
we're usually talking about four big markets that have shaped the tradition of comic books, and they started influencing each other's
Hmm.
in the years thanks to the internet and discovering new stuff. They are, of course, the American comic book market, Japanese, the French, and the Italian. Italy has a really strong tradition in comic books since before World War II,
Hmm.
and that's when the boom started. And so comic books in Italy are really, really popular. What happened during the years is that the American comic books, of course, thanks to the cultural influence of the United States, they become very popular for us.
Right.
And so I grew up reading loads of American comic books as well as Italian comic books. And even the Italian tradition was so influenced that characters like Mickey Mouse have a
Hmm.
really, really big, comic book production in Italy,
Hmm.
strictly Italian. Like stories that you have never heard of. They have never been published in America,
Right.
but they are huge here. It's like that character had a big life on its
Hmm.
own here in Italy for us.
Yeah.
And it's really strange if you think about it, because it's a really weird thing considering what kind of character we are talking about. It's Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
And
I
here
really
is,
discovered comic books when I immigrated, from Russia 26 years ago to the New York City, and obviously the mecca of comic book industry. And I started discovering it. Then eventually I started working and managing a comic book slash video game store. And I sort of started venturing off from mainstream stuff and checking out international artists. And this is where I ran into Massimiliano Fresato. It was, I
oh
think,
yes,
early 2000s when I discovered these hardcover books, his sketching and the final drawings. It was just completely blew my mind and opened the door to like Judge Dredd, the British scene and all that international comics. And I realized, hold on a second. Okay, so here I am just discovering Marvel and DC, but there's a whole giant market outside of that. So it was pretty interesting to me. Paolo, I wanted to start off on first major topic, your journey. And the first question I had for you, when did you switch from being just a comic book fan, somebody who is a kid, is flipping the pages and enjoying this stuff, to a comic book artist? When you decided, I want to do this stuff?
well, that's a hard question. I mean, I've always wanted to do it, but I
Hmm.
think the moment I realized I could actually do it was when I met an old friend of mine that I had not seen since childhood.
Hmm.
And I think I was not even 20. I think I was 19. I hadn't seen this guy for like 10 years more. And it was like, yeah, I'm currently working in American comic books. And I was like, what? Is that possible? And it was like, yeah, I'm doing colors for some IDW series, like Ghost Whisperers and stuff. And he said, yeah, it's possible to work with comic books. And at that moment, I started thinking, maybe I could do it, or at least maybe I want to try it.
Right.
I want to see if I'm up to the task, if I can actually live the dream.
Hmm.
So I basically never stopped, and I'm
That's
here
awesome.
right now.
Do you by chance
It was
remember
crazy.
what your first drawing was? What kind of character types you enjoy drawing first?
Oh well, of course, all the Disney characters like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, because that was my first experience with comic books.
Hmm.
Those were like child considered child stories.
Right.
So I had access to that comic book very early.
Hmm.
But at the same time, thanks to cartoons in the 90s like Spider-Man, X-Men, I
Right.
started wanting to read those comics. No, also Batman, because of course the Batman cartoon was very popular, and I had discovered also the movie,
Hmm.
the Keaton movie. So
Yeah.
those characters were my first experience into American
Yeah.
superheroes.
And also as a kid who is like a child of two cultures, who immigrated from Russia, I could safely say that classic Disney animated films was a visual language that introduced generations of kids around the world, not just Italy or Russia, all over
Oh
the
yeah,
world. Everybody knows Mickey
yeah,
Mouse. And I suspect it was a really good introduction for you as an artist because all of the Disney designs are simple. They're simple shapes. Mickey Mouse is basically three circles, right? And then the details inside. So it's a very interesting trampoline where to start. But I also wanted to ask you, what do you think that the artist gets that compulsion to create? That, I want to sit down, I want to create this scene, or I want to tell this particular story. Where do you channel it from?
I have seriously no idea.
That's an
I don't
honest
know.
answer.
Maybe, yeah, it's because it's. I think it's a natural instinct, to
Hmm.
create, to tell stories, right?
Right.
If you think about it, that's the main drive for all, for most of culture. If you think about books, movies, cartoons, comic books, that's the same basic drive. We want to tell stories as human beings.
Hmm.
And I think that's the main motivation behind, or the passion of many artists. Even if it's just uh, a figure of a hero or
Right.
a regular person, sitting waiting for a bus. You just want to tell a story. You want to tell that character, okay?
Hmm.
And you want to tell, of course, your experience through them. You want to tell stories,
Yeah.
and I think that's the main drive behind
Hmm.
creativity. We need to tell stories.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. But, I always separated myself from the artists because, I drew since I was a kid. Just like yourself, like martial artists, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Sylvester Stallone, Rambo, our childhood heroes of the 80s, but I always compared myself to, like, for example, my friend Ryan Irish, who's a brilliant, brilliant artist. And he just has this energy about him, this vibe that he needs to create on a daily basis. He needs to wake up and he needs to do something. Otherwise, he can't have his peace of mind.
Oh, yeah.
So I always made the distinction. I myself am a very lazy person. I'm more of a graphic designer of things. But I always appreciate, artists like yourself who always have this drive to bring more to the table. Paolo, my next question to you is Star Wars related, because after all, we're here to talk about Star Wars. Before, or maybe during your early career as you started on this journey, did you read any of the Dark Horse era Star Wars comic books? Do you have favorite artists or particular titles that you enjoyed?
Well, that's an interesting question because most of Dark Horse production of Star Wars, Dark Horse production was not published in Italy at all. Like, I had no idea it was there until very late. I had some recollection of going abroad with my family when I was a kid, and maybe getting into a comic book shop and seeing American comic books and going like, "Oh, there's a Star Wars title," but I never actually had a chance to look at those titles until very late. But I think that definitely one of my favorite was Dark Empire, I think, is the one. It was like in 2 volumes by Dark Horse, and I remember like seeing some of the art online and going like, "Wow, that's amazing." And so as soon as I had a chance, when I was in the United States, I got a copy of the comic book in both, and I think it was really, really interesting from both point of view. I'm talking about art and story. It was really, really cool. I think the artist is
Cam Kennedy, right?
Cam Kennedy.
Cam Kennedy, the Scottish artist. You know what's funny about that specific book? I sort of got into Star Wars, obviously after, growing up with the movies and stuff like that. But as far as expanded universe content was involved, I started with novels. But then my friend brought that specific comic book, Dark Empire, and he said, "Hey, Ben, why don't you start with Star Wars comics, see what you think about this?" And to be honest with you, in the beginning, I was maybe 19 years old, and I didn't quite understand the artistry, that the whole medium of comic books is to push realism, to create something fancy and interesting, and it goes outside of boundaries, what we see in the film, to separate itself as a different art form. And for a long time, I couldn't grasp what Cam Kennedy was all about. But later, when I started appreciating it, understanding his simplistic color palette, the use of composition, everything, it just blew my mind.
Yeah, I think that happened for me as well. For many artists, you see them as as a kid, as a teenager, and you're like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not convinced." But then you grow up, you start, watching a lot of art and artists, and then you realize that that art had something, even if it wasn't your favorite, it definitely had something.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a hidden locked potential there to go beyond just realism. But what do you personally prefer more? Do you like stylized visuals, or do you like comic book art, which is not cartoony but approaches more cinematic realism?
Okay, this is a tricky one because I try to. I love both.
Right.
But as an artist, I feel that what's been happening in the last, I think, in the last decade, is that there's been a push towards some kind of realism and cinematic vision since I think since Ultimates came out, when Brian Hitch brought that kind of vision to comics.
Right.
Unfortunately, that kind of vision needs a lot more time to realize. If you want to see Captain America wearing all those pockets and things and all those details on the costume, and you need to have time for the artist.
Right.
And that means that you need to really push yourself to keep up with monthly deadlines. So of course there are some artists that are really good at doing that, but of course their production is not that that it doesn't have that kind of monthly comic book thing, right? So you wish you could have more of that, but then you realize, nah, because I know what they are going through.
Yeah.
But I think both styles are really good. I think I can name artists that are, you know, going both ways and that I
And you enjoy
love.
them both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally understand.
Definitely.
And I think, as you know, I was trained in school that even to an untrained audience, when they pick up something that's supposed to look realistic but doesn't, they immediately know automatically. And us as fans, I want to say this. We often don't realize the technical aspect in terms of scheduling and execution of comic book, that all the things involved, that sometimes even when you have a passion to do something, you can't fully execute it because, you know, at the end of the day, it's all business, just like cinema is. It's you are trying to delight fans, but at the same time, you also want to make money on it. And if you're not making the deadline, it ain't going to happen.
Yes.
If you have anything to just add there too, I wanted to move to the next
Yeah,
topic.
well, I that's one of the motives, well, the reason why I struggle a lot with saying that comic book artists are like artists in a very traditional sense.
Right.
We are like more artisans. We are perhaps this is a big discussion that has been going on for ages in between professionals. I mean, we are creating art, but it's not for art's sake. That's because we have to, at the end of the day, pay the bills.
Right.
But we are forced by decisions that are being made by companies regarding their properties, and maybe just a couple of comics that are really like,
Yeah. No, I know what you're
image
saying.
products and stuff like that, that maybe those can be considered like real art in a very traditional sense.
Right.
I don't know, this is really complex. But
No, but
yeah,
it's definitely an interesting topic. You know, I had a conversation with Greg Hildebrand,
oh
the
yes.
one of the grandest artists of, you know, commercial artists in the United States with 60 plus year career. I was completely honored to speak with him, and we had this really interesting topic where he talked about the elitism in art, where you have the fine art school who teach about, you know, the higher art and the higher themes that it's supposed to say, versus, you know, this comic book and illustrator people over here.
Yeah.
Me and him, we're people from two different generations came to an agreement that we don't believe such thing. I believe that your comic book art has just as much value to culture as the Metropolitan Museum. The difference being is that comic book art serves a different utility. It has a different purpose, right? You bring a different intention. Sometimes you, as an artist, just have to interpret somebody else's story. Frank Frazetta got legendary and
Oh yeah.
famous for drawing Conan the Barbarian, which is not his creation, but he gave a voice to a literally character and became famous on that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the reasons this the whole discussion is so confusing, because you open comic books and you see stuff that literally makes your jaw drop,
Yeah.
that makes you feel something, and you think, well, maybe it's not just about, making a couple of lines, on the paper to get at the end of the day and say, okay, I can put fuel into my car and I can pay, the light that's
Yeah.
giving me a chance to read comics.
Yeah. Paolo, I'm going to
Because
play. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you and Greg about this. Yeah,
If I may
really, really.
play to your ego before we move to the next topics, and I'm being completely sincere about this, when the Marvel announced a new run of Star Wars comic books, I was so hyped in 2015. I started buying physical issues. I still have them, every issue. But after reading Kanan, The Last Padawan 12-issue series, it kind of started waning down on me. It was such a fantastic run that the rest of the mainline books like Star Wars and Vader weren't there for me. And when you stepped in with the Bounty Hunter, I was like, oh man, this is back to the good old Dark Horse day. This is serious stuff. This is an artist here who's come with this vitality of focused storytelling. And of course, it's a combination. It's not just you. It's the authors, it's the panel designers. It's the combined effort with you in charge, leading the pencil lines. That was completely on board. I just felt that difference of energy there. They were trying to re-strategize their things. So now I want to move on into talking about the craft. Why comics? Why did you choose comic books as a medium? What are the advantages of this particular medium that it has over books, movies, or even video games?
Well, I think that mainly it's because I love comic books. What can I say?
That's a good reason.
That's a good reason. I think that one of the main reasons why one feels that comic books have such a great potential for readers of all ages and all over the world uh, is because comic book have literally a huge potential in
Hmm.
terms of storytelling. You can literally go and use the page to tell the reader what to do with our eyes. You're gonna
Hmm.
read this page, but you're gonna do it the way I planned it and I've decided. And what's I think that's fantastic because
That's
you are
awesome.
choosing the pacing of a narration, you're choosing what you want to say, when you want to say it, and of course that's done with like unlimited, like it's like having unlimited budget. Of course,
Hmm.
you have no restriction. Like, yeah, we should have like a huge dragon here. We don't have budget. It's gonna be smaller.
Right.
Nah, no problem. We're gonna draw it even bigger. Who
Yeah.
cares?
That's such an interesting way of
That's
putting it,
right.
saying that you lead the reader's eye. I remember the
Yeah.
first book on how to draw comics I picked up was Stan Lee's classic book, How to Draw Comics the
Oh
Marvel
yes.
Way, right? This is a legendary manual.
Yeah,
You can
that's
still
classic
find
one.
it in any bookstore.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how you can, follow the action from panel to panel. You can highlight tension, especially if you key drawings. For those of you guys who are not artists, we'll explain. I, as animator, you as an illustrator, we both know this concept where you position your hero in this extreme pose, which highlights the most tension or the most movement, the most action. That is so striking, which you can't have with cinema. You can't pause a movie and stare at a frame
Yep.
for several minutes, but you can't do that with comic book. It kind of pauses all the drama for you, which is really awesome.
Yes. If we can go even further with that and say that comic book invented bullet time before it was popular in cinema.
Mm.
We came up with the idea because we're gonna tell you a story, we're gonna tell you an action scene,
Hmm.
but we're gonna use the panel and the number of panels, the words, and who's speaking and when to stop
Hmm.
the action scene when we want it, slow down because we are gonna use a different camera angle
Right.
when we need it to slow the narration, then we're gonna pick up with a faster action.
Hmm.
Wow, that's mind blowing if you think about it. If we can actually do that stuff, and we came up with the idea before cinema got to that,
So for
because
all of you
probably
guys
they
who,
didn't have
yeah,
the technical, the technology to do that yet.
right. So for all of us who grew up on watching the Matrix trilogy, guys, Matrix did not invent bullet time, as Paolo has graciously explained to us. Comic books did it first. I honestly didn't know that particular idea that you just expressed.
Well, what I learned when I was doing art school, talking about comics, if you look at Otomo's work, Akira,
Hmm.
right? Akira does exactly that.
Mm.
Whenever there's an action scene and the Otomo wants to slow down, it just picks the camera and get you on a high angle
Hmm.
because that's the kind of angle that slows down because you actually have to look at something from the top and that figure gets static.
Right.
Okay, there is no dynamism. Really, really, really a lot less dynamism than, let's say, a lower angle. Okay, or just a regular angle. If a figure is seen from above, the action gets automatically slower.
Hmm.
That way, Otomo was slow narration for reader, and that was in the 80s. It was mind blowing, and everyone started copying that all over the world
Hmm.
because it was like
Yeah.
incredible.
I remember when I saw the animated movie, the Akira, it just
Oh,
completely
it's
blew my mind. It's phenomenal. As an animator myself, I just relish in that kind of thing. Paolo, I want to ask you a more esoteric question. If you need to take a minute to answer it, please take your time, gather your thoughts. After a comic book reader runs to a comic shop, picks up your book, and he's there at the last page, he closes it. What emotion do you want to convey to the reader after they finish reading your book?
well. I hope they're happy, of course.
Right.
Well,
Satisfaction.
definitely,
Yeah.
and I just hope they are curious about picking up the next issue.
Hmm.
Right. I think that the purpose is, well, for a regular series, of course. If we are thinking about limited series and like graphic novels and other stuff, of course, I would say, okay, I want them to have the different emotion. But if we are talking about a regular series, of course, I want them to feel I want to know what happens next.
Hmm.
I'm curious about that. I want to know everything in the comic books. I loved it, but I want more.
Right.
Okay,
It's like
so
a cool Netflix series where you can't stop binge watching because you just saw a
oh,
show and you
exactly.
need to keep going. Like, you know?
I want more. It's like having those shows that have like an episode coming every week,
Hmm.
and you're like, oh damn, I want more. I have to wait a week. Oh,
Yeah. There's
like in
one
the old
character
days.
that we're going to touch upon a little bit more, if time permits. When I was reading your series, you know, the Bounty Hunters, and I started discovering Valance, and I had to go back and actually reread and figure out through Wikipedia that he's a classic vintage Star Wars character that you guys decided to reinvent and bring back. I honestly, when I was reading the issues, I decided to wait until all of the issues came out. That I just digitally bought them all. I don't wait for the graphic novels to come out, like the whole compilation. I got them by issues. And as I was reading it, an issue would be over, and digitally, even on your tablet, you still have to go to the next issue. I just couldn't stop. I'm like, what happens to him next? What happens to the family here or to his friends? I knew you guys got me because I got into that space, and I've been reading comic books for decades. I've been managing a comic book store. You know, you're in good hands with a story where you can't get enough. You gotta know what happens next week, next month, and fans would be coming into my store and saying, "Oh, Ben, when is this next issue coming out? We can't wait to get it." You know?
Yeah, I think Ethan did an amazing job. I think that when I was asked about doing the series, I was actually in New York during Comic Con,
Hmm.
and I met with Ethan and one of the assistant editor, Tom Groneman,
Hmm.
and Tom was like, "Yeah, what do you feel about doing this series?" And I was like, "Bounty Hunters? Wow, that sounds interesting." And then Ethan told me, "Look, it's going to be about balance or balance. I don't know about the pronunciation. I'm sorry."
Hmm.
And I was like, who is that guy? I have no idea. But even as I was drawing it, the story, I felt like Ethan had hit on something because he
Right.
was actually getting, even me as I was drawing the story, I was getting interested. I was like, oh my God, what has Ethan done to this guy? what's, what's happening here? What's going to happen to him next? And a couple of times I've been like, okay, Ethan, what happens next? I've been actually asking him, you have to tell me what happens next. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic for you as artist because he gives you
But yeah.
that food for the mind and imagination, and you're like, all right, I'm on board. I'm gonna draw it this way. I'm gonna introduce this detail here. It gives you more food to more stuff to play with. I always assumed that in comic books, a penciler's job is the hardest because it combines many disciplines. You need to understand gesture drawing to show action. You need to understand composition to set up a scene so your audience is not confused of what's going on. You need to understand shading so you add depth to your character and you show a sense of volume. And of course, you need to understand the art of panels. I, as animator, was taught a storyboarding for animation. You guys were taught panel arrangements. So my question is, do you feel an extra weight of responsibility in comparison to other inkers, colorists, and typists because you're sort of there first? You draw, and then you pass on the book to other creators.
Yeah, a lot, a lot of responsibilities. Because I think one of the things I actually had the chance to experiment a lot in the series was, it was like directing a movie
Right.
because a lot of the times Ethan was like, "Yep, you can do whatever you want with this panel. You can do whatever you want with the sequence." So I was actually directing the scene, choosing placement for characters,
Right.
choosing the camera angle and stuff like that. And it's like big, it's really big because you have to, consider a lot of stuff in your mind.
Hmm.
And even doing layouts it's really, really it becomes demanding because you have to, see the page, then the single panel, and at the same time think about the narration in terms of a full issue, you
Hmm.
know. And that was like to me it was incredibly amazing and fun, but at the same time it really feels an extra responsibility.
Right.
Then of course you have to think about a lot of stuff like okay, I have to keep these layers separated on my file because otherwise my colorist is going to kill me.
Right.
And then you have to make room for balloons because otherwise the leather is going to come and murder me. So loads of stuff to balance. And of course, you have lots of responsibility towards the writer, of course, because
Right.
you have to respect his vision.
Of course.
Right? If you are changing something, you want to discuss with him first and see why you made that choice and why you feel you need to make a different choice.
Right.
Okay, so sometimes we talk about, what do we want to do, what are we seeing here, and why we want to say this way. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. In animation, it was the same thing, because sometimes you need to extract yourself what you like to do and try to understand the DNA of the project, what the project requires to be successful. Sometimes you want to cram it with so many interesting ideas, but together they're just too much fat. They don't add up. They don't work too well. But it sounds like, it's definitely a collaborative process between yourself and the writer. But as far as Marvel and Lucasfilm went, it sounds like they gave you guys a lot of freedom.
Well, it was something that really surprised me at first. I mean, of course, there's the normal amount of control.
Right.
Okay, so because we are doing comic books for Marvel Comics, and the property belongs to Disney and Lucasfilm, of course.
Right.
So we have to be respectful of what the vision is, and of course what the project is, and at the same time we have to be mindful of what's happening on other series, because we're not like standing alone. Sorry, in the Star Wars universe.
Right.
We are actually doing stuff at the same time as the people who are doing the Star Wars title and the Darth Vader, Dr. Aphra, and so on. So, but at the same time, I felt from the beginning that being on something that was considered not part of the main events was a kind of liberating, because we do not have to deal with things like what's Luke Skywalker doing here, what is Han Solo and Princess Leia, what are they doing. We had access to loads of characters, of course, but being minor characters, that meant that we could actually build them, because they had never been fully explored. Or if they had been explored, that happened on titles like the Dark Horse titles. So we were actually building them again from the beginning. And that was actually interesting, because Lucasfilm was like, yeah, you have loads of freedom, because these characters, you can do whatever you want with them. And that led to very interesting stuff, like some characters like Dengar or Zuckuss and Forlom. We actually built something with them, and I feel they become like very interesting, even for me when I'm drawing them.
I think you guys treated them beautifully. I'm currently finalizing my reading on the original Bounty Hunter Wars, and I personally prefer the modern comic book treatment a little bit better, because each player has his role to play in those comics. Now, Paolo, I wanted to speak about some critical stuff with the new Marvel series, and that is not to bring any of the current Star Wars artists down. It's not to say that they're doing bad stuff. It's just something that comes from one biased mind of one very passionate Star Wars fan like myself. My biggest critique early into 2015 and 16, those were the first volumes of the mainline Star Wars comic of the Darth Vader, and I saw, as a creator myself, as an artist, a lot of Photoshop effects there. Sometimes they would use the blur lines, sometimes they would completely use the backgrounds, which I fully digitized. And even they would take frames from Star Wars classic movies like Carrie Fisher or Harrison Ford, and they would photograph that face, superimpose it on a comic book panel, and paint over it. Or sometimes you would see clearly a 3D object, like of a Millennium Falcon or of X-Wing, positioned properly, angled in the comic book panel and drawn over it. And again, just not to sound harsh, but it sounded a little bit lazy to me. But I don't have the full picture, and I'm very critical. I understand that I come from my angle. I don't understand the full process. So my question to you is, as a professional, would you justify taking shortcuts sometimes and using Photoshop for fire effects and smoke, and even digitizing actor faces? Or do you insist that everything should be drawn by hand the way that you guys did for the Bounty Hunter Wars?
Well, I think that all the artists, even me, everyone takes shortcuts. Right. I think it's inevitable. We're doing monthly comic books. We have to rush stuff. Right. It's inevitable. I think, what what's important is not to make it too blunt for the reader.
Right.
And at the same time, I think that what happened in 2015 was that there was a lot of pressure on the series. In those early months, the early times, everyone wanted to do the best. Everyone wanted everything to be perfect. So sometimes things went a little bit like too perfect. Okay, Han Solo has to be Han Solo, so we're gonna use that shot, that frame. And of course, the artists and the people doing Star Wars, they only wanted to do, a
Their
proper
best.
rendering,
Yeah.
of characters and stuff. I'm not against using Photoshop effects as long as they are like fully part of the art and they are not that artificial to readers. And of course, I'm not against using 3D models. I use a lot of 3D models. The problem with that is that sometimes it's like the Captain America costume. You want to see all the little things and stuff in a spaceship. I'm sorry, but to do multi-comics, we need to use 3D models.
Yeah.
I personally use like 3D models. I make my own 3D models.
Oh.
And I feel like sometimes I feel like, doing after I've done like, a whole room with stuff. I feel like maybe I should have drawn that. That would have been faster. And I'm
Yeah.
like, nah, I can turn this thing around and use the camera whenever, like, however, like, no.
Yeah.
All these hours have been beautifully spent. That's good.
You
And
actually.
sometimes,
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll just say sometimes we are using 3D models. They're not totally accurate, so you need to go back and change a lot of stuff because then you have to make a comparison with the proper stuff, and you're like, this is not working. I usually use a lot of models, physical models, miniatures from the X-Wing game. And because they are fantastic models and they're
Yeah, they're
super
beautiful.
perfect.
Yeah, you
Better
actually
than 3D.
you like rest my mind a little bit. I love speaking with you and inviting people over to my podcast, whether they're legendary, hopefully super legendary comic book artists like yourself, or just regular folks who just enjoy Star Wars. Is that you gain a different perspective, and you just did the very same here. It sort of makes me appreciate it a little bit more. Once again, I am critical, but I never try to bring anybody down and say like, well, this is not the way that Star Wars used to be. And there's always purists when it comes to passionate Star Wars fandom. It's I can understand old school fans can look at the Cam Kennedy's artworks, the way that he used to draw ships in a Dark Empire, that he's showing all these ships flying in perspective, and this whole concept of space battle, and it's all drawn by hand. I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. But I think you also hit the nail on the head when you said sometimes there's so much pressure because everybody wants to do well, and sometimes you have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, and thinking about what Cam Kennedy did I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s,
Right.
on that series. Well, probably today he would have used a lot of 3D models as well, because
That's an
he would have
excellent
felt
point.
because he would have felt a lot of pressure from Lucasfilm saying, nah, that's not the latest version of the Millennium Falcon. This is the reference picture, and when he would have said, oh, come on, that's a lot of stuff. It's not like that. Okay, I have to go back and change it. You would say, okay, I'm going to use a 3D model.
Yeah.
That's not just how you use it.
Right.
If
Paolo,
the reader can tell the difference between a 3D model in a page and when the perspective and stuff is just invented of the moment, that's good.
So, Paolo, you start your sketching and drawing all on the computer. You don't draw on the page and then transfer over.
No, sometimes, well, it depends. And sometimes I just, because the first step I do when I receive the script is just starting reading. And sometimes reading the script gives me an idea of, scenes and, particular sequence. So sometimes I scribble them. I used to print the script and scribble a lot of stuff on the script.
Right.
And just like simple stuff with pen. But But in the end, I think I started doing that just straight on the computer because it gave me a chance to play a lot with what I had, on a digital page. I
Hmm.
could move stuff around and actually use it a lot better on the final art.
Hmm.
But sometimes I just have an idea, maybe I'm just have a pen and a paper lying around. I have to, and I use that as well.
Yeah.
I have not really a preference on that, I think.
Hmm. It's when I look at stuff that you guys have done, the Bounty Hunters, the Lando comic book, um, I try to look for things that go beyond and above that digitized look, that have that natural traditional hand in it. The energy, the vitality in the traditional line. When I looked at the Bounty Hunters, also what attracted me a lot. With me, comic book is a very much dual things. On one hand, I need to appreciate and love the story, but I'm also not reading a novel. I'm reading a comic book. It's a different media. I'm paying my buck for good art. And what immediately drew me in, you seem to have like a very traditional hand. There's a lot of etching there. Your backgrounds are always busy. They're always packed on detail. Always gives me a great sense of scale, but it also positions me in the scene. I understand what is happening. And I feel it's just so crucial. And the way that you pull it off, I could have sworn like, oh, this guy must have been doing it 30, 40 years later. And only now he jumped to digital platforms. It just has that vintage quality about it.
Yeah, I think it's doing backgrounds is a pain. I think that all the digital artists I know, they feel that they feel that original scene. They're like, okay, I maybe we need to look a little bit more like traditional art
Yeah.
because they feel the pressure of not being up to task. Uh, but then when you gather around, artists and you start discussing what are you using, what kind of software, what kind of brushes. Oh, can you pass me that brush? How do you do that? And you're like, oh, well, it's okay. It's not important. It's traditional or it's digital. As long as it's well done, it's
Hmm.
fine. I remember, well, I did a lot of lessons to comic book students in
Hmm.
a school here in Rome. And one of the examples of great digital art is I think he's French, is the author of Framed Ink.
Hmm.
It's a great book about using doing perspective and using use of blacks
Right.
in doing comic books and illustration. I cannot pronounce his name, and I won't try. But the title is Framed Ink,
Hmm.
and it's an amazing book. And if you look at all this illustration, it's so crazy because it's clearly digital. There
Right.
is no intention of making it look like a fake traditional art.
Right.
But at the same time, it's so good.
Hmm.
And it's weird because it's really different from what we do in comic books now.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
There's a mini series I'm currently reading. I picked up from the High Republic era. The name just escapes me right now, but it's the detective story that they're doing. It's Stellan Gias and that African American looking Jedi guy. Together they go on this
Yeah, Trial
adventure.
of Shadows.
Trial of Shadows. Thank you so much. I love what the artist is doing there. Once again, I'm sorry I don't remember the artist's name. I'll put it in the video description below. But what he's doing as well, they're using that effect on the shadows, which makes it feel like it was printed on the paper and then put digitally. It has such a beautiful vintage look to it.
It's an amazing book. I
It's
love
an amazing. I
the
love it.
story.
It's also very well done. I just completed it yesterday. The fifth issue was really brilliant. Paolo, I want to bring this conversation home. And the last topic that I wanted to discuss with you is just go a little bit outside of comic books. We talked about your art. We talked about the skill, the craftsmanship that goes into making comic books. Let's talk about Star Wars franchise in general. And the first question I had for you, as an artist, why do you feel the world is fascinated with the visual language of Star Wars?
Well, I think the power of Star Wars for me, well, I'll start with my experience, then I'll try to expand from that.
Hmm.
What is really struck me as a child watching the first movie was that it was something that it was completely out of this world. I had literally never seen something like that, anything like
Yeah.
that. Completely, honestly different. Thinking about it like years later, I felt like that it was just not visually stunning. There was also something different and peculiar about the story. Not in terms of what the story is saying, because it's really like a very classical archetype. You have a hero, you have a princess in distress, you have the old sage that is helping the young hero, okay, and then you have the classic evil guy, right? Nothing special, no rocket science. But at the same time, it was very clear that while what were actually looking at was a fantasy story more than a science fiction story. And I think that the power of Star Wars in those, the very first iterations of the movies was that you were actually looking at something that it was more like uh, a classic fantasy story set in a science fiction universe. It was not like Star Trek. Star Trek is straight science fiction, like completely nothing weird, nothing different. It's science fiction, pure and simple. Star Wars was different. Star Wars was trying to, cross genres, and I think that that was the power of Star Wars for a lot of people. Okay, doing fantasy was really hard, and it was, not very popular, I think. But science fiction, on the other hand, was like really popular. But all those fans of fantasy had something to relate to, even in a science movie, in a sci-fi movie. It's completely brilliant, and I believe that this crossing of different genres together, it's really really important, and it really helps to make great stories and some different stuff. And like you said, Star Wars Trial of Shadow, that's a detective story. Okay, you literally are looking at a classic whodunit story. You want to know who's the culprit, but at the same time, it's Star Wars. So you have Jedi Knights, you have the bad guys, you have spaceships and stuff. Don't want to spoil anything. Go read the story; it's really cool. And yeah, if you look at the second trilogy, Attack of the Clones and all that stuff, is actually a political story. Okay, more than just the Jedi fighting the Sith. The Sith, actually, what you feel like watching the movies is like, come on, when are we going to see this guy fight? Why is there's all this politics? Who's those guy in the Senate? I don't care. I want to see, but at the same time, that's fascinating because they are crossing genres again. I think that's a very powerful thing to do, and it has helped a lot in doing Star Wars. All kind of products, of course.
That's a very, very wholesome answer. It's like so many interesting points there. When I was watching it as a kid in the 80s, my father brought the 3 VHS tapes with like cheap Russian dubbing, and it was pirated tapes. We didn't have access to Western cinema legally. So I was watching it, and the first thing that just blew my mind was the lightsaber, because you see it's a laser, so it automatically speaks to science fiction, future, far, far in the future when we're going to be advanced for you as a kid. But he's using it as a sword, as something that they would use in the medieval times. And that combination, like you said, it just blew my mind because you've never seen anything like that. When you saw Darth Vader stroll into that, Tantive 4 deck as they're taking over the ship and like, where's the princess, take the hostages. You look at him, he's so different from the rest of these white stormtroopers, but he looks like a medieval knight, like a Teutonic Germanic knight. It was so different. The next question I have for you will touch upon the legends and the canon. To many fans, the expanded universe is sacred. It's literally part of their religions.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of Star Wars fans, they hesitate to embrace any new content. So what do you feel? Should the new generation of comic book artists study and draw inspiration from the old masters and reinvent that formula? Or should they just dismantle everything that came before and find a new voice for Star Wars?
I think that there's, of course, a balance here to be reached because, of course, Disney has, well, okay, we're going to put that really, really, really in a very strict economic, from an economic point of view. Disney bought Lucasfilm, and they are investing a lot of money in Star Wars, okay? So they want to build their own stuff, their own universe. Literally, they bought the stuff, they want to make it, they're gonna invest money, so they're gonna do something new, okay? And that's totally in their rights. They bought Star Wars.
Yeah.
Nothing we can do as a fan about that. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Don't want to offend anybody here, but it's a fact.
It's a fact.
And yeah, at the same time, that means that we have a lot of artists, writers that are eager to go and create new stuff. There is a chance because every time you look at a character and you
Hmm.
have to rely on like hundreds of publications,
Hmm.
you are actually looking at hundreds of chains that are gonna tie up your story. Because
Ah, okay.
how can you make a character do something if that contradicts in some crazy way an old story published in 1982 on like a small magazine, but that's part of canon,
Hmm.
and that's a problem. Of course, when Disney bought Star Wars, they were like, okay, you're free to go, no chains attached, you can do
Hmm.
whatever you want, and that's endless potential, of course, for
Hmm.
new stories. And I think this is why we had the High Republic. I think it's one of the greatest Star Wars products so far because it's free. We don't have to deal with the Skywalker
Hmm.
and all the stuff. We're just talking about Jedi Knights, hundreds and hundreds of years in the past. So you're free to go. You can tell whatever story you want. You don't have to rely on existing characters. So we are creating a whole new generation of heroes that is amazing and is completely and totally coherent with today's world. Because of
Hmm.
course, you look at Star Wars and you don't at the original Star Wars and you don't see many Afro-American heroes there,
Right, right.
and that's of course a problem for a modern audience. Okay, and that's why you look at the new titles and you have this incredible multicultural and diverse
It's
cast of
beautifully
characters.
inclusive. Yeah, yeah. I love that.
It's amazingly inclusive
Right.
without being disrespectful. Because of course,
Yeah.
if that had happened like in a story that was too close to the original movies, that would have been like different and would have been a bit weird. Because of course the fans could say, yeah, but this stuff is not in the movie.
Hmm.
That contradicts movies. But of course, if you're doing your own story and with no string attached, you are free to go. And I think that is a good thing. At the same time, of course, I believe that some of the old canon stories are amazing. Working on Star Wars gave me a chance to read and catch up with a lot of stuff I had no
Hmm.
idea it existed, or I had just seen like a couple of times around. And it's amazing. There's some amazingly good ideas there
Yeah.
that we can just take and put back into canon, or we can use an inspiration, or sometimes we just put a little homage there. Like I think Ethan wanted me to put into issue 3 of Bounty Hunters, like a very small reference to an old uh, Star Wars story, and it was like an etching on a on a on a tombstone
Hmm.
while two characters are fighting, and I was like, will people notice that? But then I thought, yeah,
Oh, yeah,
maybe
they will.
the good fans, yeah, the fans would want to see that
They'll
because
know.
they want to know that the story they love are not completely lost.
Yeah.
Okay, they need to be reassured that creators are not like taking all those good memories and putting them into the trash bin.
Yeah, I gotta tell
Yeah.
you, as a fan, and I'm sure you're a fan of you as well. I've been reading these comic books for over 20 years. I have the entire collection of Star Wars books. I'm reviewing them on my channel. It's always a pleasure to see an Easter egg. It's always a pleasure to have a young artist like yourself, who I hope has many, many years to contribute to Star Wars, that you understand where it came from and you cherish it, but now it's time to turn a new leaf, to start a new chapter. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. I was on board when they announced in 2015 that, look, we're going to put Legends over here. It will exist separately. We can't continue those stories, but we'll start something new and fresh here. And to me, to this day, I relish in the ideas when you take something like High Republic and make it scratch from new and interesting, because you're not beholden to anything. Star Wars universe can exist way outside the Skywalker saga. And if you would take a movie and you take Samuel Jackson's character Mace Windu and cast an Asian actor, and then a lot of fans would get upset, like, well, that's not he was in the original movie. You can't speak to High Republic there because they're all new characters, they're all new creations, exactly. And they ride or die on the integrity of how beautiful the story is. This is what has been my part of a conversation as far as inclusion goes in Star Wars. When you introduce a new character to me, you're introducing a new ethnicity, whether you're discussing a gender issue, the story will live or die based on how powerful the story is. You want to highlight a group of people, give them an interesting character, make the fans excited, and that will inform people, that will open their minds, and they'll say, I understand this issue now. I understand what they're talking about. It makes it all interesting. If comes the day and Paolo has risen up to the ranks of the elite Star Wars creator, and now you have the idea, you can pitch your own story to Marvel. What setting and what story type do you think you would choose?
That's a hard one. Well, I think that as a fan, I would love to work on something that is set really, really in the past of the Star Wars universe. Like, I would love to see and tell the story of how did the Mandalorian became a Jedi Knight. Mm-hmm. That's something interesting. The Mandalorian series has hinted to that, and also we had some great cartoon shows like Attack of the Clones and of course Rebels that touched on that topic as well, and it got me interested as a fan of the Star Wars universe. But at the same time, from a creative point of view, that is something I would like to do. Mm-hmm. Or at the same time, well, speaking of influence from the old Legends stuff, I would like to do a series set in the very far future of Star Wars universe. I would love to see, okay, we are like hundreds of years in the future. What happened? What's going on? Like, that would be interesting. Mm-hmm. The old Legends series, I can't really remember the name.
Legacy.
It was Legacy? Yes, Legacy. Legacy was really interesting. It had a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of great characters. Sometimes they were doing really crazy stuff with those characters.
This is what we're talking about,
Legacy.
Right? Legacy.
Exactly.
With Cade Skywalker.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes, Cade Skywalker, I think at some point in the story is even using drugs because he doesn't want to deal with his legacy. Mm-hmm. And that's really powerful if you think about it. Because you are really given a chance to explore really different stuff in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we go back to the topic we were discussing before. Imagine having to deal with that kind of ties to your stories doing Star Wars. Now you can create your own Cade Skywalker, your own version of that, or maybe you want to create totally new characters, and you can create again different stories based on that concept, or go in a totally different direction. Mm-hmm. Loads of potential.
That's awesome. I just get so excited when you talk about this stuff because you are the person who brings us these stories, and when I get to see and hear that you understand where it all comes from and you're so passionate about it, it gives me a chance to be excited. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait what they cook up next. Paolo, before we wrap up this podcast with my final question, I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, from all the fans, thank you for the hard work you and your colleagues, all guys, have been doing. I think you've done excellent runs on Marvel. I have not honestly heard anything but like super positive stuff that you have done, and I'm so happy that you're part of Star Wars, and just thank you for being here. Before I ask my final question, could you please tell all the viewers where they can find you? What are your links? I will include them in this video below as well.
Well, you can thank you very much for having me on this podcast and having a chance to talk a lot about Star Wars. You can find me, of course, on most social media like Twitter and Instagram. I am on Facebook, but I'm not using that much anymore. Facebook is a bit dead for me as well. Mm-hmm. And so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. That's basically the places where I post, news and previews of my art and stuff like that.
Right, and guys, we'll definitely include all the links so you get the chance to go and check out Paolo's work. So my final question is coming back to Valance. you got the chance to revive a vintage classic Star Wars character. I'm pretty sure it looks very good on your resume. If you could just briefly walk me through, how did you go through designing his visual look? Did you reference the old stuff, or did you reference the story that he's part man, part machine? What went into your thinking process?
Well, okay, loads of stuff was made up on the spot. I'm gonna say that because we had at the very beginning, we had the very early concept that was done for this series was from an early episode of another series written by Ethan and done by other artists. And so I had to start from that. So what I tried to do was to make Valance a little bit different from that, but we wanted to have this weird balance between the old traditional look that he had in the original comics, and at the same time, we wanted to build his character. So, when the series starts, he doesn't have his traditional rifle. Okay, we gave it to him later because we gave a background to that weapon. Then I was like, let's give him a poncho because I want him to look even more dangerous, even more weird, different from the original. Then slowly it will go back to his original visual. But that means that we can actually build something. And at the same time, that means that the final look we get to is not going to be his real final look, because it's going to be just a step through his story. So maybe in a couple of issues, it's going to change. And that's why I played a lot with these mechanical parts in the space, and I tried to change it as I was going on with the story. So every time the story arc ends, when the new story begins, he has something different, because I wanted to improve him. Like, okay, what it looks like because of the original stories. Let's try to move on and get something different into
He
that.
definitely evolves through your story visually.
So and so on, and it was really really fun. In definitely a very hard part was, I think it's in issue 2 of the series. It's like a schematic of Valance body.
Right.
I think that was a really really hard because I had never actually done something like that, like a blueprint of the mechanical parts. So and unfortunately most of the time we do not respect that. We change that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I go back, like, oh my god, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But it was definitely fun because I had the chance, to create something, a reference even for future artists. Like, if it ever comes the day when Valance has to appear like in a cartoon or a TV show or in a movie or in a video game, those people will have something to work on to start with. And even if they change it, I'm fine. But they have the basic idea of the character. And I think in the end, it's all about, as an artist, is being part of a Star Wars franchise and give a contribution. And as long as that contribution is something other people build on, I'm happy with that, because we're not working on crazy stories that are going to change the classic Star Wars stuff, because that's impossible. We're not allowed to do that. So we have to give us our contribution in some way, and I'm happy to give a contribution.
Yeah. It's a common theme in Star Wars. What George tried to teach his audience through it is that everything moves. That's one constant in life. And it's very gracious of you as an artist to say, look, I'm happy that I played a part in it. I get to play in this universe. I reinvented this character, and I'm fine with other artists doing other things with it. I think this is what it's all about. This is what brings energy into Star Wars, when we constantly reinvent it and ask the franchise hard questions. I'll leave you with a story. So my Facebook group, Star Wars related Facebook group that I created just to have a productive conversation about Star Wars, I constantly make posts about Star Wars artists because I'm passionate about I was passionate when I discovered your talent. I want to highlight you. I want to highlight Cam Kennedy. I want to highlight all of these artists. So I created a post of Valance, your version of Valance, and I posted it on across 20 different Star Wars groups. It got pretty big, like thousands and thousands of people saw it. And one a comment that a lot of people were throwing, they were saying, hold on a second, this is kind of inspired by Terminator, right? And I said, no, this character was actually invented way before Terminator, and Terminator was inspired by this character, and people were just blown away, man. People were so excited, and they received this character so well. I think, once again, you've done a wonderful job.
I was blown away because I had no idea. I was like, oh, okay, this character is clearly like a copy of that concept. And then Ethan Sykes, of course, he was like, haha, nope, it's not.
Yeah.
He's actually the other way around. And I was like, what? Crazy.
Once again, Paolo, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you. What are your parting words to our fans, and what can they expect in the near future?
Well, what I can say, I'm so happy that lots of people are actually trusting me and all the other people in the Star Wars department to and support us buying our stories. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy about that, and I'll try to do my best to be respectful of the fans, mm-hmm. of course. And thank you very much about that. It's all about giving contribution, and I'm happy if I see recognition with that, even if it's just like one small kid buying a comic book and saying, this is good.
Yeah. Thank you, Paolo. You were awesome to talk about. And guys, I didn't receive any inside scoop from Paolo, trust me, but I can sense it through the Force. We're going to see more stories from Paolo in the Star Wars universe. As always, guys, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
I can give you one scoop, and is you're gonna see more of Dengar, of course. My favorite character so far.
Yes, Dengar. I think he's fan favorite across the board. Fans were clamoring to see him in a Book of Boba Fett show. Well, maybe season 2. Maybe they want to start right. Maybe soon. You guys heard it. I didn't say it.
I don't know. I have no idea about Mandalorian show.
Straight from the horse's mouth. Maybe there's some inside scoop. Take it with a grain of salt, guys. Maybe things are happening. Obviously, we can't.
Comic books, of course.
Obviously, we can't talk about it because working with Mario, we got to be strict here. But once again, thank you, Paolo. Guys, thank you so much for watching this podcast. Please go and support Paolo Villanelli's work. He creates awesome Star Wars content. Hopefully, if time permits, I would be more than welcome to have you here on the podcast. We'll see you guys next time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.